Federal Fag and Alex Reynolds Mystery Series Book 2. Author Fred Hunter, publisher St. Martin's Press, New York, 1998. Narrator Eric Ost. For Raymond Dragon. Chapter 18. You realize, of course, that you destroyed an FBI sting that took months to put into operation, said Agent Lawrence Nelson, though he didn't sound exactly upset about the whole thing. I can't tell you how sorry I am to put the government out of the porn business, I replied. To say we'd put an end to it was putting it mildly. We'd managed to get out of the warehouse before it was completely gutted by flames, just as Detective Furness arrived. Mother had called him and Nelson from the warehouse office, while Peter and I were doing our high shelf act. She'd come back into the warehouse proper when she heard the shots and the noise of crashed crates. And that was when I'd spotted her. We'd also managed to drag Jeff Durkin from the warehouse, but only so his body could be given a decent burial. There was a bullet hole through his head, apparently from the first shot we'd heard fired. Holmes had been leaving nothing behind in his mop-up mission. Everything else, any link between the government and the mob, had gone up in smoke. We hadn't even been able to retrieve Holmes's body before it was engulfed in flames. It was now much later that night, and we were gathered in our room at the Hotel Windermere by the sea for a much-needed drink and much-needed explanations. Agent Nelson hadn't gone far in the way of chastising us. In fact, he seemed pensive and relieved that the whole mess was over, especially since all the evidence had burned. I hadn't expected you to discover that Scott Keller Holmes was working for the FBI, although given past experience, I might have expected it. You should have come clean then, said Mother scoldingly. If you had, the whole thing would have been a lot less dangerous. Not with your boy here, said Nelson with a rueful glance in my direction. I was afraid if he knew the truth, he wouldn't just let us handle it. I thought he'd rush in and blow the whole thing. Which he did anyway, said Mother, because you wouldn't tell us what was going on. Nelson took a smooth drink of his scotch, the first alcohol I'd ever seen him consume, and stiffened. I told you more than I should have, and you know that. You should have trusted me, accepted that the agency was doing what was necessary. Only what was necessary from your standpoint, said Peter disdainfully. We couldn't be sure that your ideal of justice was the same as ours. Nelson thought about this for a moment, without altering his expression. I chose to take his silence as tacit agreement. He then turned to me and said, by way of changing the subject, So, when did you learn that Holmes had gone rogue? I could feel myself blushing. When we were tied up. Nelson didn't comment on this, but you did manage to figure out about the money. Only after he insisted that we knew about it. What money? Said Mother, and I realized she must have missed that part of the conversation. I replied, Holmes insisted that we knew something about the money, and that was why he thought the CIA was investigating him. It took me only a minute to remember that our friend Nelson here had said he was investigating the transfer of funds overseas. So it wasn't just a mistake, said Mother, putting it together. When Holmes thought the CIA was investigating him, you really were. Nelson nodded and sighed. Only he didn't know that until the three of you happened in and someone mentioned the CIA. That was all Holmes needed to hear to think we were onto him. I turned away from him. I was truly ashamed of the slip I'd made and the repercussions it had caused. To my astonishment, Nelson's tone was somewhat conciliatory as he said, But I've made mistakes too in my time. We just try to make sure they don't happen again. I looked at him. He wasn't smiling and he wasn't threatening. He simply looked as if he was certain his point had been made. I nodded at him. Nelson then turned to Mother and said, Chances are, all things being equal, he would have eventually figured out that we were investigating him, but we hoped by then we'd have him. I still don't understand that part, said Peter. How did you get onto him to begin with? Nelson shrugged noncommittally. Checks and balances, and a little of the right hand not knowing what the left hand is doing. Admiral General Distributors was selling overseas. We keep a close eye on them, and everyone connected with them. In our surveillance, we found that someone connected with them, Derek Holmes, was transferring large sums of money overseas, presumably the money he made from the videos. While investigating him, we discovered that he was working for the FBI, and the money he was transferring was supposed to be going into a slush fund to pay for the operation. Peter said, Holmes said that Malibu has a way of getting under your skin. Exactly, said Nelson. The life the FBI had set up for him to do the thing was too alluring. Like that Sherlock Holmes story, The Man with the Twisted Lip. I tried to hide my surprise at hearing that Nelson read Arthur Conan Doyle. He found he could make much better money joining the business than he could be by exposing it. Oh, Lord, said Mother. She looked blank for a moment, then shrugged and sipped her tea. After a short silence, she poked up and said, Who was it that searched my apartment? I imagine it was Holmes, Nelson answered uncertainly. But why? I think I can answer that one, I said. Holmes found out you were connected with us at Santa Monica Pier, and he might not have known where we were staying, but he knew where you were. She blinked at me, then smiled. Jeff Durkin. Of course. Exactly. Mother thought about this for a moment, then turned to Nelson. Larry, why did you ask me to watch Patrick Gleason? Nelson glanced at me, and I got the impression he was about to offer a practical demonstration of the fact that, even at this stage of his career, he could make mistakes. That was an error on my part, of course. After we'd started to investigate Holmes and Man-O-Man Productions, we knew everyone connected with him. We knew Gleason was one of those people, but didn't think he was important. So I didn't think it would hurt, as long as you were interested in seeing him anyway, if he kept an eye on the goings-on at his apartment. Mother looked perplexed. But you didn't recognize Patrick's name when I called you. You didn't say anything about it until you called me back. Yes, that's true. But that was because, though it was a CIA investigation, it wasn't my case. Whose was it? I asked. Nelson took another drink from his glass, set it on the table, and said, The man you know as Ridden Forrest. What? Peters and I exclaimed in unison. We detained the cameraman who was originally working for Holmes. Then Ren Forrest showed up on cue and wormed his way into the job. Oh my God, I said, still in disbelief. Then it wasn't a coincidence that he showed up when we were being attacked behind the gay bar. He was following us. Nelson looked just a little embarrassed. Well, no, it wasn't a coincidence, and you weren't really attacked. That's funny, said Peter, curling his lip. I distinctly remember having a knife shoved in my face. And being rescued in the nick of time, Nelson countered. Wren thought it best, since I couldn't convince you to leave, to try to scare you into thinking it was too dangerous for you to continue. Oh, great, I said sharply. We were almost killed when our tire was shot out from under us, and almost killed behind the bar. And both times, it wasn't the mob threatening us. It was our own government. That's just great. Nelson sighed. I still contend that the FBI's original sting operation was worthwhile, though it did have some unfortunate side effects. I rolled my eyes, and when they dropped back to earth, I noticed how bitter Peter looked. I felt the same sense of bitterness, but I was just a little, inclined to think that Nelson might have a point. If only they could trust their own people. What about Willie Moreno? Said Peter. And the mob connection. Will it just be business as usual for them now? Since Man-O-Man Productions has been dissolved with such finality, I have no idea what the FBI plans to do about Moreno and company. Mother took another sip of tea. I wonder what the FBI will have to say about our putting an end to their little escapade. Nelson looked at the three of us in turn, downed the remainder of his scotch, and stood. Nothing. Nothing? He flashed an annoyed smile at us and said, Nothing. You mean we won't be in any trouble at all? More than that, I'm sure there was never an FBI investigation into the connection between the porn industry and organized crime. Look, Nelson, I said, rising from my chair, I don't know what you're trying on about, but I'm sure, he continued pointedly, that if anyone was to look into it, they'd find there was absolutely no evidence of any investigation whatsoever. Thank you for the drink. He started toward the door, but I stopped him. Larry, what about the CIA? Would we find any evidence of a CIA investigation into Man-O-Man Productions? He smiled. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. With that, He walked out the door. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.